Now, generally with individual students, I would always be saying, the first question I would ask is what have you learned in the past? What have you already been shown? If you say a total beginner, I've never even picked up a guitar and made a sound with it or something like that, then that's not a bad thing at all. You know, that means you haven't developed any bad habits that we would need to work hard to correct. By far the most common thing that I see for people who might have tried their hand at guitar in the past is that they might have a friend or something who's shown them, a couple of chord shapes, right? So, I don't know, a C chord or a G chord or this sort of thing. So you've got this pattern of where you've got to lay your fingers out on the fretboard here and hope that you're, strumming the right strings in the right way, that you're getting a decent sound out of it. Now, this, in my opinion, can be the most frustrating way to go about learning it. Is why so many people give up within, not long at all and say, no, I'm not good at it, it's not for me. There are definitely people who are naturally got the coordination in their fingers and the chords might come to them easily, but most people won't. If you've got big hands as well, it'll seem like there's not enough space in between the strings to actually get the fingers in there, but plenty of examples of guys with way bigger hands than me that are still able to play the chords and things well. Now, what is a chord? Basically, as soon as we are playing more than one note at the same time, we can call that a chord. Now, most people, when they think of chords for guitarists, they're thinking of what we call open chords, meaning that there's going to be at least one open string ringing out at the same time, this sort of thing. The easiest way for us to learn our way around these is to make sure we understand a chord chart. Okay? It's very simple. It's just the vertical lines represent the strings, and the horizontal lines are the frets, with one thick one at the top being the nut. Now, sometimes with some chords we're not allowed to strum all the strings, so we need some way of marking which ones we are allowed to play, and that might be done with dotted lines, or I'll put squiggly lines over the strings that we really want to avoid. And from there, all we're going to be doing for the chord charts is putting numbers 1, 2, 3, and 4, which are just indicating which 1, 2, 3, and 4, which finger we're using. I think most guitarists would agree that the easiest chord to start on is an E minor chord, and with this one we get to strum all the strings, and all I'm going to be doing here is putting my first finger on the second fret of the A string, and my second finger, my middle finger, on the second fret of the D string. Now, a lot of people might play it with the second and third fingers like that. Either way is fine. I prefer to do it that way. That way I've got these fingers freed up if I want to do something with them later on as well. Anyway, so there's an E minor chord. Now, the best habit to get into when you're first learning your way around chord shapes is to just play that one string at a time, just to make sure that each one of those notes is sounding out and there's no buzzingness or weirdness going on. So here we go. 1. Okay, that open G could have been better. There's that E minor chord. We're going to look at a more challenging chord now, the G chord. I kind of think of this one as one that really sort of has to stretch the fingers out. So if you have smaller hands, this is going to be a challenge for you. If you've got big hands, this is probably going to be more of a preferred chord for you. So I'm going to start by putting my middle finger on the third fret of the low E string. I'm going to follow that up with my first finger on the second fret of the A string. And then the last one, this is the tricky part. I've got to get my third finger or my little finger, either one, onto the third fret of the high E string right at the other end of the guitar there. There it is. See if you can get that one working, and then I'm going to hear how it sounds. Here it is, one string at a time. A G chord. Now let's have a go of a D chord. Now I think of this as one where we've really got to sort of scrunch our fingers up, scrunch our hand up a lot more. It's pretty cramped. We're sort of tying our fingers in a knot for this one. So if you've got bigger hands, this one's going to be a challenge for you. So I'm going to start by putting my first finger on the second fret of the G string, and then I'll put my third finger on the third fret of the B string. Okay, so here's the hard bit. Now I've got to get my second finger, my middle finger, onto the second fret of the high E string. So all those fingers are kind of scrunched in there like that. Now for this one, we're only allowed to play the bottom 4 strings from the D string down. If I were to play all the strings, no one wants to listen to that. It's only those 4 that make that chord work. Now, ideally, we'll get to the point where we can just sort of snap all our fingers straight into that chord. But as you're getting used to putting those fingers in the right spot, you're going to need to do it one finger at a time. Okay, so for the G chord, we'd be going middle finger there, following that up with the first finger there, like that, just putting them one at a time. So we always want to get in that habit of building them from the top to the bottom, meaning that they're going to be able to hear the lowest notes followed by the higher notes. And the reason we do that is that when we're switching chords, it can give us a little bit of extra time to keep the music flowing while we do, you know, because it takes a second to get all your fingers from one spot to another, rather than having to always be snapping them straight away. We might be able to do this sort of, notice how I could sort of keep the music going just by hearing that one lowest note by putting the others on. Okay, so we'll see a few more examples of that as we get into playing some chord progressions. You know, a sequence of chords put together, we just call a chord progression. Take your time with that. Then the good exercise to start with will be just practicing cycling back and forth between the G chord and the D chord. And we could throw in an E minor because we know that one as well. We're making music. So even though we've come all this way with our picking technique, we don't want to totally forget about the other styles, the other approaches to playing that are out there. Namely the classical style where we wouldn't use a pick, we'd be using our thumb and our first three fingers to be playing the strings. So the basic rule that we stick to for that is that the thumb is going to be covering the bass strings, the three thickest strings, and these three fingers, in the same way that we've been assigning a finger to a fret, we assign these three fingers each to a string. So we're sort of resting the fingers at an angle like this. The first finger would be playing the G string, the second finger playing the B, and the third finger playing the high E string. So again, the same benefit as assigning a finger to a fret. We don't really need to look at our guitar so much to know what string we're playing. It's just a matter of the movement of the correct finger, and then we would hear the string that we're looking for. Now, of course, the thumb needs to skip around a little bit and be a little bit more coordinated, but it's only got three strings to cover, so it's a good way of playing. So we can use this for our chords. So sometimes in this style of playing, the classical style, in notations we can label each one of the digits here that's going to be playing. The little finger doesn't get one because it's pretty awkward to be trying to use the little finger to pluck strings as well. So it's these four fingers. So we use a one-letter initial for each one of the fingers. This comes from Spanish. I had to do my homework here to find out what these actual words were. So instead of T for thumb, we use P for pulgar. That's right. And then the I is index, which in Spanish is indice. M for medio or middle finger, and then A for annular. So P, I, M, A. One of the first exercises that we're going to be putting to use with the chords that we now know is the Pimami exercise. So all that we're doing there is, again, if I'm doing this thing of bringing the fingers forward, P, I, M, A, M, I. P, I, M, A, M, I. So that was 6 notes in that pattern, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So when we play that over a chord, we're going outside of our usual 4/4 timing. We're sort of back into the next most common time signature, 3/4. So something like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So the thumb is always just going to be playing the root note of the chord. When I say root note, I just mean, so if we're playing a D chord, then the thumb is going to be playing a D note. And let's try that actually. Let's go for a D chord. Okay, now my thumb is going to be playing the D string. So we're not going to use the E or the A strings because we don't for a D chord. So I wanted those 4 strings. Then we can use that to practice. This is an actual song. It was REM song, Everybody Hurts, was a huge hit in the 90s. That's basically switching just back and forth between a D chord and a G chord. It might not sound exactly the same as the song, but it's just another exercise for us to practice. D. Then I'm going to move to a G chord. You'll notice that when I switched to the G chord, my thumb skipped over to the low E string, so I was playing a G note to go along with the G chord. G chord. Back to D chord. So working on this classical style of playing, some people prefer it and hate using a pick, so it's not a bad thing for us to come back to this from time to time.